To the CRP. This is Devin, and I am joined with Miguel Iterati, and this is a CRP News Roundup for September the 11th, 2019. We've got a lot to talk about, but before we get there, I just want to say greet Miguel, and it's been a while since I talked to you, Miguel. How you been?
Yeah, it has been a little bit. Glad to be back, and just want to take 5 second bow my head moment of silence for the day that is today. Anyway, so
It's a cliche standard question, Miguel, but where were you on 9/11?
I was at the Hagerstown, Maryland Citibank complex working.
So you actually weren't far away.
No, I actually left the office because the Pennsylvania plane was actually supposedly heading towards Washington, and we were over it. And the idea that they could fly the plane into that complex, which has 3,000 or 4,000 employees and is visible, was tossed around. So they were sending people home and stuff. So, it was definitely one of those things where my mom told me about it. She called me at the office around 9 in the morning, and it was starting to go down. So.
Yeah, I was actually home from school that day. I was only in like fifth or sixth grade at the time, and I stayed home from school. My mom was calling me from work, telling me that New York City's under attack, and I turned on the TV, was watching CNN, and I remember watching that second plane slam into the South Tower live on TV. And
yeah, we were in a conference room at that office, and we were watching the TV on the wall, and the second plane hit. So. Yeah, it's definitely you don't want to just disrespect and not pause a moment and talk about the day a little bit. But the UFC hasn't left us without subject. So go ahead and take it away, Dev.
Well, I'm going to pull up right here the first headline. This one from Sherdog here. It says Dustin Poirier promises a fight next time he sees Colby Covington at ATT, and going in a little bit. Then over here we got an MMA Junkie headline that says, with feuds full steam, Colby Covington ready for anything at American Top Team. Looking into this article a little bit, I'll read some of it. Colby Covington might have to watch his back next time he steps into the American Top Team gym. Having thrown jabs at two of his teammates, Dustin Poirier and his ex-best friend, quotation marks, Jorge Masvidal, Covington has made some enemies. He started off by predicting that Khabib Nurmagomedov would defeat Poirier at UFC 242, which Poirier, following his loss to Khabib, didn't take so well. So some serious infighting going on down there in Coconut Creek, Florida, between three of the top guys in the UFC. Dustin Poirier, Jorge Masvidal, really taking issue with their fellow teammate down there at the gym, Colby Covington. And Colby Covington, I listened to his interview this week with Ariel Helwani, and if this is not an act, I don't know what the hubris is with this guy, but it's very unlikable. I mean, I understand this is an individualistic sport, but he's the first guy I've seen that's treated his teammates that way. What's your thoughts on all this?
Yeah, I mean, again, I don't know Colby. I do actually know Masvidal pretty well. I don't know Colby, and I know Poirier through the grapevine. I don't know him personally either. And yeah, everything I know, and this goes back with a little bit of experience, is that the moron here is Covington. He doesn't seem like the smart, snappy presentation that he thinks he's giving people. You know what I mean? And he doesn't realize that he's putting a lot of people off. I would prefer not to cover him anymore. I mean, this is basically a recycled story of him talking, trash about one thing or another, and again, trashing teammates and things like that. Nothing really surprises me. The guy, after the Matt Hughes conversations, I know, with Chad and Soda Pop, we've got a little bit of a link to Matt Hughes, so maybe we, as a group, took that as a little bit of a sore subject. But I don't think we're the only ones. I think we're talking about an issue of showing some class, and he just doesn't have it. You know what I mean? So he's not a clever. If he thinks he's like a Mayweather type, yeah, it's like Mayweather has managed to, get people to hate him and stuff like that. But Mayweather is also managed to cash in a major way. Whereas, Covington is still out there, still slogging and working and doing all this stuff because he hasn't gotten that payday. And, he may talk his way out of it still if people are smart. The UFC said, they didn't want to fool around. They didn't want to deal with it. And he lost his shot at main eventing Madison Square Garden, which is a lucrative deal. George Masvidal, in another blog, is going to talk about how he's very happy with the payday that he's gotten as a main event there. So let me get this straight. Masvidal, who's paid his dues for 16 years, is content with the payday for a non-title fight, whereas an offer was made to Covington to fight Usman, and he didn't take the offer, maybe wanting more money for a title. The offers had to be comparable. What has he done that, to deserve more money than Masvidal? Absolutely nothing. Masvidal, you don't. The UFC doesn't have to pay for Masvidal's fight with Eve Edwards 10 years ago or whatever, but there is that standing on the shoulders of your career. You don't like people taking pay cuts, and so there's a whole management thing there that does it. And again, the bottom line is Masvidal's at the point where a lot of people are rooting for him to get the payday, and they're not rooting for Covington, who's doing things right here.
Yeah, I think that's really the big catalyst behind all this, and this is where it really started, was last week, because we were all pretty much bracing for Covington to be matched up with Usman and Diaz to be matched up with Masvidal, and that was probably going to be the MSG card. Now, I think the UFC actually had that planned, and then everything started to fall through. We heard from Ariel Helwani that the negotiations for the Usman and Covington fight were falling through. Covington later said on Helwani that they're just basically trying to pay him a challenger's salary when he looks at himself as the A side. And that's all fine and good. The negotiation things, that's all, that's all standard practice. Nobody can really fault him for that, for feeling like, I'm the A side. I'm the main attraction. I should get at least, the championship pay, or at least get it closer. Like he said, we can come to negotiations. We can get it a little bit more evened out. The thing that I think bothered him, rubbed him wrong, is that the UFC just started calling him his bluff and started aiming toward his teammate Masvidal, and Masvidal started to just, buy into it. He's like, all right, yeah, I'll fight Usman. Let's negotiate. And then later on, Usman comes out, Masvidal, I meant, so I'm getting all these guys involved. Mm-hmm. It's getting their names mixed up here. Masvidal comes out later, and he makes a tweet saying, to Nate Diaz, forget these dummies. Let's fight. Like, let's do it for the baddest mother effer title. And because, deep down, I think he thought about it for 2 hours and was like, wait a minute, the Usman title fight's not near the fight the Diaz bout is. And then I think that rubbed Colby the wrong way. And that's when Colby came out with the tweet saying, look, George, I know you're dumb and desperate, but, I'll tell you what's super necessary is winning for title fights. And you guys can fight for the journeyman award title, because that's what you guys are. He just started really laying in to Masvidal. And at that point, I looked at it as kind of infighting and little, I didn't know for sure if it was an act. I didn't know what it was. But him coming at Dustin Poirier now, I'm not understanding the motive. Because Dustin Poirier handled that defeat this week with complete class. And Colby comes out on Helwani's and talking about, that was a Golden Globe performance, and just really throwing a lot of shade toward his teammate Dustin Poirier. And he called him to lose the bout going in. I just don't understand what his motivation is for just being – people know that he's the bad boy. People know that he's got that persona now. But he's just trying to just hit the accelerator and just be just completely universally hated. And maybe it's smart. Maybe it's smart for his brand. Maybe it will pay off in the long run. But I think that right now he's got more problems on his hands, because if this is all organic and genuine, he's going to literally have to watch his back, because he's going to be in there. And Dustin Poirier said it's on site. Believe that when I see you. Like Dustin Poirier said, when I see Colby Covington, it's on site in the gym. Like, we're going at it. And I've seen gym wars. I've seen people get called out in the gym, called into the ring, and get beat up by teammates to be taught a lesson for the way they act. So, this is an interesting scenario right now for Colby Covington. He's definitely going to be a lone man. And what do you guys? I know that you and Chad are familiar with Dan Lambert. What do you think he thinks about all this, Miguel?
Dan is, I had a good business relationship with him for many years. He sponsored many of our shows, and we featured a lot of American top team fighters in the early days. I don't pretend to speak for him or have any insight into how he runs American top team. But if I were to guess, I think that the guys who actually compete, the fighters, that the actual ATT competition team, I don't want to say they have different rules and stuff, but he'll let the gym and the process police them, and he won't insert himself. It's just my way of thinking, because if he had to, he'd be in there all the time, because they do have a high level number of guys and this, that, and the other stuff. I think he wants to stay away from a lot of that stuff. They faced this type of controversy before, and they'll face it again. And that's what I think that he provides, is an atmosphere where, if they really have to keep Poirier, Dean Thomas, Poirier, Masvidal, and Covington happy, you can put one with Laborio, one with Dean Thomas, and one with Billy Padden, and they'll never cross. They actually have enough of infrastructure for that. At the end of the day, it's a business, and if you look at it, let's just say Colby Covington, I don't know what his contract is with AT&T, but he could be giving anywhere between 10 and 30% of his pay salary to the school in order for them to train him and prepare him for fights. And if he's making $100,000, for a fight, and he's over that already, that's $30,000, that he pays to the school if they're saying he's tagging them for 30% for everything. Mm-hmm. So at the end of the day, you don't want to lose that. You don't want people walking out the door. They lost Lawler, another high-end guy. At the end of the day, that means that they have less money coming in on a month, and it is a business. I don't think Dan's the guy worrying about all that. I think he's given that structure there. But I think that, like I said, the thing that makes ATT powerful there is that there is an infrastructure where if they have to deal with them beating each other up on site like kids, then okay, we happen to have 3 different facilities, all pretty much stocked, pretty much at the highest level. So you don't have to worry about it. We don't miss a beat. You got to drive a little more. So, they may have some solution there. If not, if someone leaves a la like when Robbie Lawler left, it could be a situation there that, at the end of the day, the business, there are going to be underlying reasons for the business partnership to end that we won't see or know all about. So, I think it's an interesting situation that bears watching. I think they can actually deal with all 3 guys in-house, and that's how powerful top team can be. But, maybe at the end of the day, they get tired of Covington and they say, go ahead, Cole, you want to leave? Go ahead, go. And they let him go. So, it's one of those interesting things. But like I said, I don't think Colby's winning points. And to me, it's just at the point where, people start ignoring him and stuff, and we can move on. Then, I really don't care if he gets his payday or not. And that's the problem with what he's done, is enough people don't care, then you're in bad shape. It's not the Mayweather effect of they love me or hate me. It's like if they don't care, and I really don't care what happens to the guy anymore. He's been over the line for a little bit too much for me. It's just not my style. Yeah,
and just to throw this just at the end here, there is I guess some negotiations about a potential. I guess there's an ESPN Network card in December in Washington D.C. and Ariel Helwani mentioned that's a possibility for the new placement of Usman versus Covington. I think there's also this possibility that they didn't want to stack 2 very lucrative fights on one card. And we all know Masvidal and Diaz are going to carry that show, and they're going to get rewarded for it accordingly. And we'll talk about that a little bit later in this podcast. But moving on to some other big news from over the weekend, and it came out today. The headline here from MMA Junkie is Khabib's manager is saying that George St. Pierre is next, not Tony Ferguson or irrelevant Conor McGregor. When we look into this article a little bit, it says that according to Khabib Nurmagomedov's manager, we won't be seeing the UFC lightweight champion face either Tony Ferguson or Conor McGregor next. Nurmagomedov submitted Dustin Poirier in the 3rd round at UFC 242 to regain his title. and talks of a potential next started almost immediately. At the UFC 242 post-fight news conference, UFC President Dana White confirmed that former interim champion Ferguson, who's currently riding a 12-fight win streak, would be next if he wants the fight. And then later on just some quotes from Abdelaziz, Khabib's manager. He says that nobody really cares about what Tony says. Nobody gives a really. As far as I know, GSP is next. That's what I want. Tony doesn't get what he wants. We get what Khabib wants. And if Khabib calls me and says he wants George St. Pierre will be next. And I tried to warn people when the whole GSP retirement thing was going on that don't buy into it too much, because he's kept the door open for a potential one-off with Khabib. That's what he wants. Khabib wants it. I don't like hearing this because I don't think the UFC is going to be so bold to go in the direction of Conor McGregor. But I will say that when I did hear Dana White say, oh, well, Tony's next, but if he doesn't take the fight, we'll go with Conor. The first thing that comes to my mind is, okay, so they're going to try to lowball Tony so bad that he turns the fight down and then give it to Conor is what they're going to then try to run with. Oh, well, he turned the fight down, which is ridiculous. I mean, the way that they just really the way they do Tony Ferguson is just unbelievable. But now I'm seeing GSP's name being brought in, and that's, I think, a lot more possible. There's a lot bigger of a possibility there, because I'm not sure that even the casual audience at this point is going to buy into the Conor McGregor hype, knowing that Tony Ferguson's on a 12-fight win streak, and they know that Conor needs to get in the win column before there's even sufficient hype, I think, for the Khabib rematch at this point. The GSP fight's a lot different. That's a mega super fight, a lot of legacy involved. It's a legit risk to Khabib. It'd be a very tough challenge for Khabib. So that one's a little bit different. It's still just, man, I mean, what more does Tony Ferguson need to do? And now I don't even feel like it's, hearing this from Khabib's manager, Miguel, I don't even feel like it's just the UFC now. I feel like Khabib's and his team is almost starting to pull like a Mayweather-Pacquiao on Tony Ferguson. Tony Ferguson's 35 years old. It's almost like they're wanting to get a few more years underneath his belt and see if his legs start slowing down, see if he gets injured again before they push for that fight. What's your thoughts on all this?
Yeah, it's a mess. And, I think, to me, the most appealing fight is the Ferguson-Khabib fight. That's the most appealing fight of any of the fights that we're talking about. As you said, St. Pierre brings in a legend aspect, but I don't know if that's necessarily appealing. You know what I mean? When we saw him come back, we saw him work the system to his advantage. We saw a very selfish athlete in terms of, didn't want to defend the belt, wanted, to be put in super fights and wanted to only get what he wants and stuff. And he's, in fact, retired now because he didn't get exactly what he wanted. So, St. Pierre can stay retired as far as I'm concerned. I'm not a big fan of kowtowing to him. And again, we know that Bisping was a good fight for him, and that he would have been run over with some of the other 185-pounders. I could see him bowing out, but just in the way he did it, he didn't win my respect anyway, So now we always, like you said, very disingenuous with the retirement. Very obvious that he was going to keep a door open. And if he does get what he wants, and that's what's going to be. I mean, he's a well-off guy. He didn't blow all his money. He doesn't have to fight. So he can wait around and get what he wants. And that's, if it's coming around now, then, yeah, I could see Khabib, being talked to by, outside parties who say to him, you're going to make double the money to fight George St. Pierre. And at this point, like I said, money begets money. He's enjoying it. I think the money that he's making makes him actually more powerful in his home country, that the money goes further. And, he's at the point where, he can build buildings, orphanages, schools, and things like that almost, A couple more of these fights, and Khabib is there. He was talking about helping Dustin Poirier because of how many Instagram followers he has and stuff, and adopting his T-shirt and stuff. Khabib's not a fool, and that's why the St. Pierre stuff, is probably starting to come around and make more sense to him.
Yeah, but that's also what kind of scares me about these whole negotiations right now with Khabib, because Khabib's now he's on like Conor levels. He just got paid $6 million for that fight over there in Abu Dhabi, and he's become such a big star now. And I believe I heard that Dustin Poirier only got like $250,000. And you come to some guys like Tony Ferguson and Nate Diaz, they're going to walk away from those kind of negotiations when they're looking at that big of a lopsided deal in pay. And Tony Ferguson is the fight to make, obviously. I mean, that there's so much. 4 different times that fight's been matched up. Fell through all 4 times. And every time that fight's just continued to get better. Tony Ferguson's on a 12-fight win streak. These guys have a 27-1 combined UFC record at this point. And they're so far ahead of the game. They've cleaned out really the best weight class in the sport that people have been saying for about 8 years now. And I mean, there's so much legacy behind that, but then you bring in George St. Pierre, and there's some legacy there too, because you got 2 of the greatest fighters that we've ever seen in Khabib and St. Pierre. Both of them beat everybody they've ever fought. GSP's avenged both of his losses triumphantly, and Khabib is undefeated, obviously. So there's some storyline there, but just like you said about the word disingenuous when it comes to St. Pierre, I remember when he just gave that retirement announcement and he talked about it wouldn't be fair of him to just come in, take a title right off into the sunset. And it's just like, man, we've seen this story before. Just a few years ago, you did the same exact thing. He was out there clamoring, saying, I'm gonna walk away. I'm gonna retire if you don't give me the Bisping fight. He wins the Bisping fight, wins the middleweight title, and then literally vacates it the very next week and just walks away, gives up the belt. They make the interim champion, Robert Whittaker, at the time the champion. I don't know where this is going to go. I think the St. Pierre fight, I'm hoping that this is just all talk on the part of Khabib's manager. Javier Mendez was on Ariel Helwani earlier this week, Khabib's trainer, and he says that he wants the Tony fight. Dana's indicating that he wants the Tony fight, although I think he wants the Conor fight more than anything, but which makes me a little bit nervous, as I said, about them lowballing Tony, trying to get him to like basically pull himself out of the fight. Like, no, I'm not going to take those negotiations. Then running with, oh, well, you backed out of the fight, so we're just going to go with Conor now, or St. Pierre, which would be, I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if they tried to pull some of those kind of works on somebody like Tony Ferguson. They've done it before. But I'm hoping that they can get this Tony fight done for late December, January, February, the latest. Get that fight out of the way. And then after that, we'll see where it goes with Conor. We'll see where it goes with St. Pierre. I'd be up for anything at that point. But the Tony fight has got to happen. It's been long overdue. And I think anything other than that would be really a travesty at this point.
I have nothing else to say. I managed to get through the whole segment without mentioning McGregor once, and I think I'd like to leave it at that.
Fair enough. And then moving on, we got some more news here. We got a fight announcement. We won't spend too much time on this, but Jacare Souza will be headlining against Jan Blachowicz at UFC Sao Paulo November 16th. And this was interesting for me. Jan Blachowicz, top 5 light heavyweight right now. There's been rumors of him fighting John Jones. Just came off a big knockout over Luke Rockhold. Jacare Souza's coming off a very hard loss to Jack Hermanson, and he's nearing 40, and now he's going to move up in weight to 205 to fight a top 5 contender. And it's an interesting bout. I'm guessing that they needed a headliner for Sao Paulo down there in Brazil, so they looked for Jacare. Didn't find anybody at middleweight, I guess, that would suit the bill. So they're doing this for Blachowicz. But when I look at this fight, Miguel, I'm kind of thinking that this is just kind of an opportunity for Blachowicz just to really kind of establish a name at this division, because light heavyweight has nobody. Chris Weidman's moving up here in a couple months to fight Dominic Reyes, who's a young star coming up. Johnny Walker's fighting in Madison Square Garden. But right now, there's nobody for John Jones to fight. John Jones really, I mean, unless they run it back with Anthony Smith or he moves up to heavyweight, he has nobody. Blachowicz was the only other guy that kind of makes sense right now that he hasn't fought. And now they're giving him a headlining bout against Souza, which is it's a solid name, and they're going to be going into his backyard. Do you have any thoughts on this, Miguel?
Yeah, Souza, I think at this point in his career presents an interesting case to the UFC. He's not a guy who's going to go back and start I think I think he's a guy that you can't doubt he's paid his dues, right? So I don't think he's going to go back and work his way through. Let me get a light heavyweight and then hope after a win maybe a top 15 guy. No, he wants to break in. I think he will want to break in with a top 5 guy. If you look at the top 5 right now, Blachowicz might be the most doable opponent for him. I tend to think Jacare, I've known him since he was, coming up in the Abu Dhabis and stuff like that. And it's hard for me to see him competing with, even at middleweight, he was outsized against like the Luke Rockholds and the, some of those guys. Now at light heavyweight, he's going to be a smaller guy here, although he's very fit and very heavy, very strong and stuff like that. And I don't have a doubt that he'll put the muscle on right and stuff. But still, I think, size-wise, height-wise, length-wise and stuff, this jump is going to be a little bit too much for him. And Blachowicz, now a top 5 guy, he might learn that right off the bat.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think this is going to end up being a showcase for Blachowicz. I think that Blachowicz is a very solid and stout 205er right now. And I think that this is going to be a good name on his resume moving forward in his pool for a potential title fight, or at least a potential number 1 contender fight from here. We had another fight announcement. This one being announced by ESPN's Brett Okamoto. Breaking news, Stephen Wonderboy Thompson versus Vicente Luque has been added to UFC 244 on November 2nd in New York City. Per Dana White, Wonderboy wanted to return to MSG, and Luque, 10-2 in the UFC, is from New Jersey. Fun matchup at 170. Completely agree. Very fun matchup. Luque, I think, is around 13-14 ranked right now at welterweight. Wonderboy Thompson coming off the hard knockout from at the hands of Anthony Pettis. People forget that Wonderboy Thompson, he's had some hard losses. He lost to Darren Till. He lost the 2 Woodley bouts. But he's also the last guy that beat Jorge Masvidal. He was a very top prospect. Vicente Luque has been on a complete tear, a legit welterweight in this division. So I think this is a very good matchup. I think that this is really like a do or die almost for Stephen Thompson's relevance at this point. I think this is a big chance for Vicente Luque to put himself into the top 10 of what I believe is the best division in the sport right now. Welterweight is so stacked from top to bottom. I mean, from everybody from what we just talked about earlier with Kamaru and Colby and Woodley and Leon and Masvidal and Nate Diaz now and Ben Askren, Damian Maia are fighting. Santiago Ponzinibbio is still in there whenever he can return. So this is a big division right now. Robbie Lawler, Luque and Wonderboy, I think is going to be a good matchup for this division at the moment. And like I said, I think this is really Wonderboy fighting to basically stay relevant and Luque fighting for a chance to get into the top 10 of this division. What do you think?
No, I agree with you. I think Luque is a guy who's already putting enough work that he maybe should already be there, right? But it's so stacked that, he's beyond notice. He hasn't gotten noticed. Here, Stephen Thompson's a guy that, because he's been to main event fights, that people know him, right? So Luque really has a shot at taking some name recognition with an impressive victory here. Thompson coming off a loss, it's always questionable to see there. And the interesting part is I'm not sure if Thompson talked about moving up to 185, but maybe at 170 it's part of what was affecting Thompson is the weight cut and stuff, because he did seem to not get off in a couple of his recent outings and things. So I do think it's an interesting fight. I think if it goes the right way, unfortunately Stephen Thompson may be continuing his slide, and Luque will get his spot moving up. That's if the right thing. I don't want to say the right things happen, but that's if the current way. It seems to be heading in that direction. That's what I mean, just from the karma perspective.
Yeah, I agree, and that has been my biggest criticism of Wonderboy Thompson in the past, is that he does tend to have sometimes some lackadaisical fights, doesn't have enough volume, but then other times he just looks terrific like he did against George Masvidal. And speaking of Masvidal, next story here, George Masvidal, heads are going to pop when UFC 244 payday is revealed. When I saw this headline, the next thing I thought of is that George Masvidal is next going to tell us that the sky's blue and that your body needs oxygen to live, and that the heart pumps blood and circulates blood through your cardiovascular system. He's going to state the obvious, apparently, because I don't think anybody suspects that these guys are not getting paid. These are two guys who Nate Diaz now has matched himself up in his last 2 fights. He's got so much leverage right now. He knows how to use it. He'll walk away from the sport for 3 years if he doesn't get what he wants. Masvidal's kind of doing the same exact thing right now. He's been just, both these guys understand their attraction. They understand who they are. They understand their caliber, their name, and they understand what this fight's going to be. And they understand that this is a massive fight for the UFC right now. This is a fight that's so big that it's got Conor McGregor literally clamoring to keep himself relevant. I mean, as soon as the Nate Diaz, Anthony Pettis exited the ring just a few weeks ago, how brilliant was it of Nate Diaz to come out and not call out Conor? Doesn't even mention Conor. He goes straight to Jorge Masvidal, and the fans love it. The fans want to see it. And this got Conor McGregor to come out like a washed-up rock star to have an interview with Ariel Helwani and just clamoring to keep himself relevant because they know how big this fight is. This fight right now, Nate Diaz angled toward Masvidal because Masvidal's name's bigger than it's ever been. And Masvidal knows that this fight's huge for his name. The winner of this fight, not only are both these guys going to get paid very tremendously, they're headlining Madison Square Garden. I don't think people realize. I mean, they go there once a year. It's one of their 2 biggest shows. And they're going to headline this without even a title on the line. I mean, these two, what they've done for their names over the past few years. After really, I mean, Colby did have a point after being kind of journeymans for several years. I mean, they were beloved journeymans, but ultimately they had. I mean, they're like Colby said. I think Masvidal's 5-5 in his last 10, and Nate Diaz is somebody that got completely ran over by RDA and Rory McDonald and Dong Young Kim and Benson Henderson. I mean, he's definitely. I mean, Josh Thompson knocked him out. Both these guys have definitely faced some adversity, but man, they just kept grinding like Donald Cerrone and others. And their personas and their ability to go in there and lay it all on the line and stay tough and get better and keep coming back stronger. They've paid their dues, and now here they are. They are literally about to headline Madison Square Garden, and both these guys are just so universally loved. We know, George, you're getting paid. You're getting paid, brother, and we're happy for you.
Yep, I think the interesting thing, and I think to pay attention to here is, for example, with Khabib announcing an unprecedented payday. They haven't, we've heard other people have made that kind of money and stuff like that, but it's always come with bells and whistles, not like the official payday amount for the fight. And again, Abu Dhabi may have had a local sponsor that may have assisted with that or been responsible to that, but I think you also may be seeing, now that they are with ESPN Plus and they are experiencing different distribution than the UFC has in the past, there definitely are going to be more money streams. The idea is now internationally and things like that, ESPN Plus is going to make it available to more people, and maybe they're able to monetize, in a little bit better. I think a lot of guys, if 4 years ago or 2 years ago they signed a 4-fight deal where they were making $250 and $250 for every fight, they're happy at this point that deal is coming to an end, because they get to re-up in a new atmosphere with a lot more money coming in. So I do think that the ESPN deal and them able to monetize through that on the business end has something to do with it. So more power to them. And again, I'm all for every one of these guys grabbing as much money as they can. So
absolutely, and I think that I can speak for the entire CRP here that we are very, very happy for these two. Moving on, we got a big card this weekend. It is a big, pivotal lightweight bout, and I know you don't like talking about Conor McGregor, Miguel, but I think that this is the fight actually for the Conor McGregor sweepstakes. We talked about earlier this year that Cowboy Cerrone, there was a lot of talk about a potential bout between him and McGregor, and now there's a lot of talk about Gaethje. Here you got the number 4 and number 5 ranked lightweights going to war in a headlining bout this Saturday. This fight will be in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. And it'll be at 155 pounds, as I mentioned. Big bout here between these two. And also on
My
this
old hometown of Vancouver. I lived there for a couple of years, and it was pre-UFC days back then, but they've hosted the UFC a couple of times. It's not one of their frontline venues, so I think, it's a card where if they have the two main event guys and then the rest of the card kind of humdrum, The two main event guys, I think you're right. They're probably playing for that sweepstakes, and I think, rankings aside, Gaethje's been on his way up. Cowboy, is back on his way down a little bit after this loss and stuff. But you can still name, with Khabib and Poirier and guys above these guys and stuff like that. So yeah, I think what that does is it comfortably sets McGregor up to start tumbling in the rankings. And I think, McGregor, the fact is I would consider against any of these guys that he's going to have to be probably the underdog. I don't know if I'd favor him against any of the other top five.
See, I don't. This might upset you a little bit, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure if I agree with that. I obviously would definitely favor Khabib. Khabib's going to be a hard one for anybody to beat. I would favor Tony Ferguson in a 5-round fight. A 3-round fight, I think, could be a little closer just because Tony does tend to get hit early before he really starts wearing people down with pressure. Same with Nate Diaz, but in 5-round bouts, I would pick both Tony and Nate over Conor at this point. I don't know what we're going to get when we get Conor back because all the images indicate that Conor's in great shape. And when in his interview with Ariel Helwani, he talked about that he's been training, says he broke his hand. He planned on coming back in August. I don't know if all that's just smoke and mirrors and they didn't have the right opponent for the right time. When it comes to these two, I could see Conor taking on either one of these fights because if there's one thing about Justin Gaethje, for example, Justin Gaethje gets hit. If there's one big criticism about him, it's that he takes a lot of damage. And that was the big criticism when he first came into the sport. Michael Johnson was lighting him up in his debut. And he came back and won that bout, and Eddie Alvarez was lighting him up. And I would signal toward the Eddie Alvarez fight that he got knocked out in. It was a great fight as an indication that Conor might be a step ahead of somebody like Justin Gaethje and Donald Cerrone. And I think Justin Gaethje is going to win this fight as much as I love Donald Cerrone. But so I think that we might be seeing Justin versus Conor. I think Conor will take that fight. I think Conor will be the taller, a little bit longer reach, a little bit quicker and sharper of a striker in that fight. But man, if he's not able to get Gaethje out of there early and it starts to fade, Gaethje will finish him. And I think that's the end of Conor's career if that happens. And same with Cowboy, really. If he's unable to get Cowboy out of there and Cowboy is able to weather the storm and gets Conor out of there at that point, can Conor recover from losing a bout to one of these two?
Yeah, I think he's in a dangerous situation. I think any loss next is a bad mark to him. I think he can maybe justify or survive another loss to Khabib, which may be why he's pushing for that rematch so much. But anybody else, with all the talk, all the bluster, all the zeros on his paychecks and stuff, it's not unfair to ask him to beat any of the other guys there, and we'll see if he's up to it.
I agree. Looking at the rest of this card a little bit, you got, as I mentioned, Donald Cerrone and Justin Gaethje topping the card. You got Glover Teixeira coming back. He's coming off his big win over Ian Cutelaba, who was really brought in as a young contender to beat him and make a name off him. And they're kind of doing the same thing here with Nikita Krylov. They're bringing in Nikita Krylov, who's a very tough, very solid fighter. Nikita Krylov, he's coming off a win over OSP. And he's 27 years old. His only loss in his last 7 fights was to Jan Blachowicz. So they're kind of bringing Glover in, and there's, like you mentioned, there's really not a whole lot to talk about on this card. You got the return of Todd Duffy. You've got a bout between top-ranked middleweights between Antonio Carlos Jr. and Uriah Hall. You got Misha Serkinov coming back, taking on an undefeated young, 22-year-old kid, Jimmy Crute. But other than really those top 2 fights, there's not a whole lot to talk about on this card. I think it'd be disrespectful to say something, not say anything about Glover though, because I do want to bring that up before we sign off, because we talked a little bit about that going into the Ian Cutelaba fight, I remember. And And then we talked a lot about how great it was to see him go out there and get the win, because they kind of have been angling Glover to be a gatekeeper, and Glover's kind of shutting people down. And I think if he keeps this up, he might come back to contendership at such a weak division at light heavyweight. There's nobody there. If he wins this, I mean, I wouldn't be opposed to seeing him fight Blachowicz or Anthony Smith or any of those guys. I think he could hang with them.
Yeah, and he's adapted himself pretty well. You know, as he's aged, he went from being a total slugger who didn't really care, about taking damage in order to dish his out, and being a feared guy running that style, to now, fighting a little bit more of what I would term a cerebral style, smart style, where he'll get the takedown and you give him the takedown, and then he'll work from there. He'll take a submission if you give it to him. He's added facets to his game, so I would not be averse to seeing him get an Anthony Smith or someone like that on the way for his next fight. I think that could be very interesting, actually.
Well, I think the UFC really just gave up on Glover because of how bad he was just battered by Alexander Gustafsson. But that was Gustafsson's best performance that he ever had, other than the first Jones bout. And Gus really just went in there and put a clinic on Glover, knocked him out in the 5th round with those nice uppercuts. And ever since then, they just really have got out of the Glover Teixeira market, apparently. And I don't know why. I mean, he's always been a very solid fighter. I mean, he came up, was on a great run, ended up fighting for the title. I'm looking at his resume right now. I mean, he's got 2 wins in a row right now. He did lose to Corey Anderson, but he's finished Misha Cirkunov, Carl Robertson, and Ion Cutelaba 3 out of his last 4. And other than that, his only losses were he did have the quick, just like 6-second, just flattening from Anthony Johnson that I do remember. That was a sad performance. But his only losses in the past decade were the John Jones and Phil Davis decisions, the knockout to Johnson, Gus, and the decision loss to Corey Anderson. I mean, these are top-level guys that he's lost to. And as you mentioned, he's really kind of revamped his game. He looks really good. He looks like he understands where. And
it's a smarter game, too. He's not taking damage as much, and I think that's, a critical jump to make, because if you still think, I'm just going to come forward and stuff like that, it's better to be protective of yourself in the B side of your career. You can let fly, I think, when you're younger, and he did. And I think he's showing progress in my book, getting out of that habit, just giving him some credit.
I totally agree. But this has been a CRP News Roundup for September 11th, 2019. Miguel, was good talking to you. We covered all the high points. Maybe we can get back either late Friday night or early Saturday morning to recap whatever else falls down the pipe in the world of MMA.
Cool. Thanks a lot. Definitely good to have you set back up in this way, and hopefully we'll be bringing a lot more dual commentaries here on the UFC and more. Please hit like and subscribe. I'm Miguel Dorati, and there is Devin Miller, and this has been the CRP Moment. Thanks.